Carl Jung warned us about something most people still hesitate to accept. Women, far more often than men, do not express themselves with literal directness. But this is not a flaw. It is a form of ancient intelligence, one deeply misunderstood, often criticized, and yet absolutely essential for navigating the emotional world. In modern relationships, this lack of straightforwardness is often misinterpreted as dishonesty or manipulation. But if you look closer, if you really listen, it becomes clear. This complexity is not deception, it's protection, it's subtlety, it's survival. Jung discovered that the feminine mind doesn't operate in straight lines. It weaves, spirals, dances between instinct, intuition, and emotion. Where a man might seek clarity through direct words, a woman often communicates through nuance, through tone, through silence. Through the words, she doesn't say just as much as the ones she does. What she feels may be layered, like music with multiple harmonies. And if you only hear the surface melody, you'll miss the entire emotional symphony underneath. This isn't just poetic theory, it's psychology. Jung recognized that masculine and feminine energies speak entirely different dialects of the same emotional truth. The masculine tends to focus on facts, logic, and goals. The feminine moves through feelings, context, and flow. Neither is superior, but problems arise when we pretend they're the same. In fact, one of the core reasons relationships fail is because we assume the other person thinks like we do, but they don't, and they never will. Jung's research into the anima, the feminine side of a man's unconscious, and the animus, the masculine side of a woman's unconscious, reveals a fundamental polarity. The need to integrate, not translate. To listen, not just respond. When a woman says, "I'm fine," it may mean anything but. When she says, "Do whatever you want," it could be a plea to prove you care enough to choose her. And while this frustrates many men, calling it irrational misses the point entirely. It's not irrational. It's emotional truth communicated in a different language. She's not trying to trick you. She's trying to protect something sacred. Herself, her vulnerability, her trust. This isn't exclusive to romantic relationships either. It shows up between mothers and sons, female bosses and male employees, sisters and brothers. Anywhere feminine energy is present, there is this complexity of speech, expression, and intent. And if you're not attuned to it, if you've been taught to only value logic, literalism, and bluntness, you'll miss the deeper reality altogether. Jung didn't frame this as a criticism of women. Quite the opposite. He viewed it as a necessary psychological force that balances the cold rationality of the world. A woman's words, emotions, and intuitive shifts are messengers from the subconscious. The feminine doesn't just tell you how things are. It shows you how they feel, how they move, and how they hurt. But here's the tragedy. Society often teaches women that this emotional wisdom is weakness, that they need to be more like men, more direct, less sensitive, more factual, less emotional. And so they suppress their language, hide their truth, and play roles that please others but betray themselves. At the same time, men are rarely taught how to listen with emotional ears. They are told to man up, to expect straightforwardness, and to mistrust what they cannot quantify. As a result, both sides end up disconnected from their inner feminine and from each other. Understanding this truth isn't just about improving your communication with women. It's about waking up to a hidden world of meaning that most people ignore. It's about recognizing that silence can be a scream, that kindness can be a shield, that love, expressed in feminine form, rarely fits into neat, linear boxes. We're not speaking about gender stereotypes. We're speaking about energy. The feminine psyche, whether expressed by a woman or a man, requires space, patience, and a willingness to feel into the unknown. It is not something to be figured out. It is something to be witnessed, gently and without control. Jung believed that the feminine was not less rational, but differently rational. And perhaps it is this difference that can lead us back into deeper connection. If only we have the courage to listen, not just with our ears, but with our soul. So, before you judge her silence, pause. Before you assume she's being difficult, breathe. Before you call her confusing, ask yourself, am I listening with expectation or with presence? Because sometimes the deepest truths aren't spoken, they're felt, and those who rush to decode may never actually understand. In the world of the feminine psyche, what is said is only a doorway, not the entire room. Carl Jung understood this better than most. The feminine doesn't just want to be heard, she wants to be felt. She's not always testing your intelligence, she's testing your presence, your ability to listen without fixing, to witness without interrupting. This is where most men fail, not because they're unkind, but because they were never taught to read emotional subtext. To them, A request is a request. A no is a no. A yes is a yes. But in the language of the feminine, those words often carry invisible ink. I'm fine might carry pain. Do whatever you want might carry disappointment. It's up to you might mean, please choose me. You might be tempted to label this as manipulation, but be careful. That assumption comes from a purely masculine lens, one that values logic over intuition, clarity over depth, control over surrender. When a woman speaks in circles, it's not because she's trying to trap you. It's because her heart doesn't live in straight lines. Let's go deeper. Why might a woman not say exactly what she means? Because at some point in her life, direct honesty was punished. Her vulnerability was mocked. Her truth was ignored. So she learned the rules of survival. Speak in ways that won't make people uncomfortable. Hide your pain in politeness. Bury your needs under smiles. This isn't deception. It's conditioning. And it's everywhere. When Jung explored the archetype of the anima, the feminine presence in the male unconscious, he described it as mysterious, emotional, unpredictable. But he didn't say these qualities were negative. He believed they were necessary. In fact, the anima is what connects a man to the emotional world. Without her, he becomes rigid, cold, and disconnected from others and from himself. The modern man, Jung might argue, has lost his relationship with the feminine entirely. Not just with women, but with his own emotional depth. He wants clarity, but not mystery. He wants peace, but not complexity. He wants love, but not transformation. And this is where relationships crumble. Because the feminine doesn't offer a straight road. She offers a spiral staircase, one that invites you deeper and deeper, but only if you have the patience to climb without always needing to know where you're going. Now, let's talk about the test. Yes, it's true. Sometimes women test men, but not out of cruelty, out of need. When a woman says something she doesn't mean literally, she's often asking, "Can you see me beneath the words?" When she picks a fight over something small, she may be asking, "Do I still matter to you when I'm not easy to love?" When she withdraws emotionally, she might be wondering, "Will you come closer, even when I'm not perfect?" You see, the tests aren't about tricking you. They're about safety, about longing, about trying to feel secure in a world that so often invalidates the feminine experience. Most men fail these tests because they think they're supposed to win them. But the point is not to win. It's to witness, to stay, to not flinch, to prove, not with grand gestures, but with small consistencies, that you are present even when the waters get murky. A woman's tests aren't always verbal. They're energetic. They're emotional. They come when she's quiet, when she's restless, when her eyes say what her mouth cannot. Carl Jung would call these shadow moments, the times when our unconscious surfaces and challenges our egos. The feminine shadow doesn't scream. It whispers. It asks, "Are you still safe, even now?" And most men, untrained in emotional listening, miss it entirely. Instead of staying present, they get defensive. Instead of listening deeper, they argue. Instead of asking, "What's wrong?" they say, "You're overreacting." And just like that, the bridge collapses. But it doesn't have to. When a man begins to understand the symbolic nature of feminine language, everything changes. He stops taking things personally. He stops needing everything to make sense. He realizes that sometimes love is not about solving, but about sitting, about staying near, even when nothing adds up. This doesn't mean a man should tolerate emotional chaos or manipulation, but it does mean he must learn to distinguish between true toxicity and the feminine expression of fear, sadness, or need. Because if you can't handle a woman's waves, you don't deserve her ocean. And here's the paradox. When a woman trusts you to see her without explanation, she becomes more clear. When she feels emotionally safe, she stops testing. She starts telling. Not because she changed, but because she relaxed. She no longer has to protect herself from the pain of being misunderstood. That's what emotional safety does. Jung believed that every relationship was a mirror, reflecting back what we most need to integrate in ourselves. If a woman's indirect language frustrates you, ask, what part of me is afraid of the unknown? What part of me demands total control? What part of me has shut down its own capacity for nuance and emotion? These are not small questions. They are transformational. And if you have the courage to ask them, you won't just become a better partner, you'll become a fuller human being. Because the goal is not to figure her out. The goal is to meet her there, wherever she is, even if that place is uncertain, emotional, or entirely unfamiliar. As Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. So don't be afraid of what doesn't make sense. Be afraid of never learning how to feel. Because the moment you stop needing her to speak your language is the moment you begin to hear her fully. If the feminine sometimes hides beneath layers of indirect speech, the masculine often hides behind projection. When a man cannot own his emotional state, he unconsciously assigns it to her. Suddenly, her sadness becomes too much. Her needs become needy. Her confusion becomes manipulation. But none of it is truly hers. Carl Jung described projection as one of the commonest psychic phenomena. It is the ego's way of disowning uncomfortable truths. What we deny in ourselves, we begin to see everywhere else, especially in those closest to us. In romantic relationships, this shows up in subtle, insidious ways. A man who feels insecure might accuse her of being controlling. A man who secretly craves affection might shame her for being too emotional. A man who fears abandonment might claim she's too clingy. None of these accusations come from clarity. They come from fear. A fear so deeply buried that the man can't see it within himself. So he projects it outward, like a mirror turned inside out. And here's where things get dangerous. Because when this kind of man meets a woman who's emotionally intelligent, who communicates her feelings, who expresses vulnerability, he doesn't see her as grounded. He sees her as too intense. Her truth threatens his illusion. Her emotional honesty exposes the very parts of himself he refuses to confront. He might say she's making things up. He might call her too sensitive. He might say, "You're overthinking it." Each of these phrases is a red flag. Not just about the relationship, but about his relationship with himself. Projection isn't about the other person. It's about the inner world being too painful to face. And when this kind of man stays in denial, a painful loop begins. The more she opens up, the more he retreats. The more honest she becomes, the more invalidated she feels. Until finally, she stops talking. Not because she's healed, but because she's learned it's not safe. This silence is not peace. It's emotional surrender. Let's be clear. Not every man who struggles with emotion is abusive, but a man who consistently uses shame, gaslighting, or emotional ambiguity is avoiding growth. And a woman who consistently tolerates it isn't weak. She's misunderstood her role. She thinks if she just explains better, softens more, loves harder, he'll eventually understand. But this rarely happens. Because the real problem isn't her volume, it's his hearing. The feminine doesn't just want to be loved, she wants to be seen. And when that gaze is clouded by projection, the love becomes distorted, conditional, transactional, even punishing. Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is why so many women stay in toxic relationships. They call it love, but what they're actually living is his unconscious, projected onto their reality. She is not crazy. She is not over-emotional. She is not the problem. She is simply the mirror, and he can't bear the reflection. But here's the hard truth many avoid. If you stay long enough in someone else's projection, you begin to doubt your own reality. You question your feelings. You suppress your needs. You silence your voice. And worst of all, you begin to internalize his shame as your truth. This is how a strong, intelligent, emotionally grounded woman becomes a shadow of herself. Not because she lost her way, but because she was slowly rewritten by a man who never knew his own pages. Now let's flip the lens for a moment. Why do some women stay in these dynamics? Because they're also carrying unconscious beliefs, often rooted in childhood, past abandonment, or early conditioning. Maybe they grew up watching their mother appease their father. Maybe they were told to be nice, to not cause drama, to be low maintenance. So now, when they're gaslit, they blame themselves. When they're dismissed, they apologize. When they're invalidated, they wonder, was I too much? This is not love. This is emotional survival. But it can be healed. Jung didn't believe we're doomed by our past. He believed in the power of individuation, a process of becoming whole by integrating all parts of the self, especially the shadow. For a woman, this means reclaiming her voice, reclaiming her clarity, reclaiming her inner authority to say, no, this is not love, this is fear in disguise. Because true connection doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't punish you for your truth. It doesn't reward silence and label it peace. Real love invites all of you to the table, even the messy parts, the complex feelings, the hard conversations. And yes, this kind of love is rare. But it starts with one thing, not settling for anything less. You see, projection is only powerful when you agree to carry it. When you refuse to hold what isn't yours, the spell breaks. You return to your center, and from that place, you can begin to attract, not rescue, a partner who knows his own inner world. A man who listens. A man who reflects. A man who's not afraid of complexity. Jung once said, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. And when two people meet, Not in fantasy, not in projection, but in mutual awareness. Something powerful happens. The drama fades, the mind games vanish, and in their place, something rare begins to grow. Trust. The kind of trust that doesn't require constant proof. The kind of trust that doesn't manipulate with silence. The kind of trust that says, I see you, not just the parts you show me, but the parts you're still learning to love. That's not just intimacy. That's freedom. At this point, you might be wondering, if women don't always mean what they say, and men don't always hear what's being said, how can true connection even exist? It's a valid question, one Carl Jung wrestled with his entire life, because the truth is, neither gender is broken. But the relationship between them often is, not because of malice, but because of misunderstanding, because we project instead of perceive, because we assume instead of ask, because we judge what we don't yet understand. Jung called this the tragedy of the unconscious relationship. When two people connect, without having integrated their own shadows, they don't love each other. They love the fantasy they've built. And when that fantasy shatters, the real work begins. But by then, most people are already gone. This is why so many relationships feel impossible, not because love failed, but because consciousness never arrived. Let's take a deeper look. In many relationships, the woman plays the role of the emotional guide. She brings the depth, the nuance, the sensitivity. But if her partner hasn't matured emotionally, this richness feels overwhelming. Instead of joining her in that depth, he retreats into logic, detachment, or silence. He doesn't say, I don't understand you. He says, you're too emotional. He doesn't ask, what are you really feeling? He says, you're being dramatic. This dismissal isn't just frustrating. It's wounding. Because when a woman opens her heart and is met with confusion or contempt, a message is sent. Your feelings are inconvenient. And slowly, over time, she learns to say less, to need less, to be less. But let's not make this one-sided. Many women also enter relationships with their own projections, expecting the man to save them emotionally, to fix their pain, to provide clarity for confusion they haven't yet explored. This dynamic of him rescuing, her submitting, creates a distorted polarity. It's not masculine-feminine, it's parent-child, and it's doomed to collapse under the weight of unmet inner work. So what's the solution? Jung believed it was integration. Not just integrating your own shadow, but integrating the opposite energy within you. For men, this meant facing their anima, the unconscious feminine aspects of their psyche, their capacity for emotion, vulnerability, connection, and creativity. For women, it meant facing their animus, their inner strength, clarity, direction, and assertiveness. When this inner work is avoided, men demand silence from their partners because they fear their own chaos, and women demand saving from their partners because they haven't yet trusted their own power. The result? Codependency, projection, emotional starvation. But when this inner union is achieved, when a man embraces his anima and a woman embodies her animus, something extraordinary happens. They meet each other not as needers, but as mirrors, not as saviors, but as witnesses, not as enemies in the battle of gender misunderstanding, but as co-creators of conscious relationship. Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. That's what love is meant to be. Transformation. Not a script to follow, not a war to win, not a checklist of who's right and who's too much, but a daily invitation to meet yourself through the eyes, the heart, the resistance, and the honesty of another. And here's the catch. You can't do this work for them. You can't force your partner to evolve. You can't beg them into consciousness. Jung was clear. What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. So, if you're resisting your own clarity, waiting for them to change, you're feeding the very dynamic that's hurting you. The only way forward is ownership. Own your patterns. Own your projections. Own the part of you that keeps choosing partners who can't meet you. And then, let go. Let go of the idea that you have to carry the emotional load for two people. Let go of the belief that love requires suffering. Let go of the need to be understood by someone who hasn't even met themselves. Because here's the deeper truth. The feminine doesn't need to be decoded. She needs to be felt. And the masculine doesn't need to be feared. He needs to be trusted. But none of this is possible without self-awareness. So if you find yourself in a relationship where the same fights keep happening, where your truth is minimized, where your intuition feels muted, ask yourself, am I living in their projection, or am I living in my power? And if the answer breaks your heart, let it. Because that heartbreak might just be the first honest moment in the entire relationship. Let it break the illusion. Let it break the cycle. Let it break you in the best possible way. So you can begin again, not as the wounded woman begging to be seen, but as the conscious woman who sees herself. Fully, bravely, unapologetically. And from that place of clarity you'll know, you were never too much. You were simply in a place that was too small. And now, you're walking out. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with the quiet, steady certainty that you deserve more. Because you are more.